You wake up with a sore throat. Within minutes, you've searched your symptoms, read 3 conflicting opinions, and considered 4 different medications you could pick up on the way to work. You barely think about how strange this process is. For most of human history, none of that existed. No pharmacy, no internet, no diagnosis with a name, and yet humans survived plagues, infections, injuries, and parasites for hundreds of thousands of years before a single antibiotic was invented. So what did they actually do when they got sick? The answer is not that they simply suffered and hoped. The answer is that your ancestors had an entire system, built from observation, behavior, and an instinct you still carry today, whether you realize it or not. Picture a man lying in a shelter, fever rising, body aching, appetite gone. He doesn't reach for medicine because there isn't any. Instead, his body does something remarkable on its own. It raises its internal temperature, drains his energy, and makes him want nothing more than to lie still and be left alone. This isn't malfunction. This is strategy. Evolutionary biologist and disease researcher Paul Ewald has spent decades studying how sickness behavior evolved as a coordinated defense system rather than a random breakdown. His research suggests that fever isn't a side effect of illness, it's a deliberate weapon. Many pathogens cannot survive or reproduce efficiently at elevated body temperatures. Your ancestors' bodies were essentially turning up the heat to cook the invader out, all without anyone deciding to do it consciously. Fatigue served a purpose too. A sick body that keeps moving, hunting, traveling, and working burns energy that's desperately needed elsewhere, for immune response, for repair, for fighting infection. Lying still wasn't weakness, it was resource allocation. Psychologist and behavioral immunologist Robert Dantzer has researched this phenomenon extensively, describing what he calls sickness behavior, a coordinated set of responses including lethargy, loss of appetite, social withdrawal, and reduced movement, all triggered by the immune system itself. Your brain receives chemical signals from your immune cells and deliberately makes you feel terrible, not as punishment, but as a survival directive. Rest, conserve, heal. This explains something that seems almost absurd at first. Losing your appetite while sick isn't your body failing you. In many infections, reduced eating may starve certain pathogens of resources they need to multiply while redirecting energy toward fighting them off. Your ancestors didn't know this on a biochemical level, but their bodies acted on it anyway. Every single time they got sick, there's a second layer to ancient survival that goes beyond what the body does automatically, what ancient humans actually did in response to illness, behaviorally and socially. Anthropologist and medical historian Sherwin Nuland documented how across countless traditional societies, sick individuals were often isolated, deliberately and consistently, long before anyone understood the concept of contagion. This wasn't always framed as disease avoidance in the way you'd think of it today. Sometimes it was wrapped in spiritual or supernatural explanation, but the behavioral outcome was identical. Separate the sick from the healthy, reduce contact, slow the spread. Anthropological research on numerous hunter-gatherer and small-scale societies has documented remarkably consistent patterns. Temporary shelters set apart from the main group, specific individuals designated to bring food and water without lingering, and strict behavioral taboos around touching or sharing items with the unwell. None of this required germ theory. It required observation. Sick people who stayed near others often led to more sickness. Groups that separated the ill, even instinctively, survived more often. Over countless generations, this behavior became deeply embedded, not because anyone proved it scientifically, but because it simply worked. Plants played a far larger role than most people assume. Ethnobotanist and researcher Richard Evans Schultes spent his career documenting how traditional societies across the world developed extraordinarily sophisticated knowledge of medicinal plants, often through generations of careful trial, observation, and oral transmission. Certain barks reduced fever, specific leaves eased digestive distress, particular roots numbed pain. This knowledge wasn't superstition dressed up as medicine. Many of these remedies contained genuinely active compounds, some of which modern pharmacology has since isolated and synthesized into medications still used today. This wasn't guesswork passed down blindly either. It was refined constantly, generation after generation, the way any system improves when survival depends on getting it right. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Many animals exhibit a behavior researchers call self-medication, deliberately seeking out specific plants when sick or injured, plants they otherwise ignore when healthy. Primatologist Michael Huffman has documented chimpanzees seeking out specific bitter plants with antiparasitic properties only when suffering from intestinal infections, a behavior with no cultural transmission required. It appears instinctive. If our closest living relatives carry this instinct, it raises a compelling question about how deeply rooted this behavior might be in our own evolutionary history, long before any of it became formalized into what you'd recognize as medicine. Which brings us to something genuinely strange about your own body today. You still carry every piece of this ancient system. When you're sick, you still lose your appetite. You still want to withdraw and rest rather than push through. You still develop a fever that makes you miserable but is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Modern medicine didn't replace this system. It was layered on top of it, sometimes working with it, sometimes working against it, like when you take fever-reducing medication too early and inadvertently interfere with your body's own defensive strategy. Your ancestors never diagnosed a virus. They never understood antibodies or pathogens at a cellular level, but they built a remarkably effective system anyway, one based on watching what worked, isolating what spread, treating what could be treated, and trusting a body that, even without any instructions, already knew exactly what to do. You reach for the medicine cabinet again, your symptoms fading after a long day in bed. But underneath the convenience of modern treatment, an older system is still quietly running the show. The same fever, the same fatigue, the same need for rest that has been protecting humans since long before anyone thought to write any of it down. If you don't want to be the one searching symptoms at 2 a.m. with 4 browser tabs open, subscribe. Your body's been running this whole operation since long before Google existed, and there's a lot more of that ancient system still working underneath the surface.